George Lindsey wasn't just upset, he was angry for years when Jim Nabors was taken off the Andy Griffith Show to star in Gomer. Pyle, USMC. Lindsey felt betrayed. Goober never does miss a Cary Grant movie. He studies him. He studies him on account of he takes off real good on Cary Grant. Both played the funny country bumpkin, but only Nabors got the credit, his own show. Lindsey stayed playing supporting roles, watching the others shine. He never forgot that. In later interviews, Lindsey revealed his bitterness, sometimes openly. To him, Hollywood had made the wrong choice, and that anger haunted him for the rest of his life. George Lindsey was considered the top choice for a new character on the Andy Griffith Show. The role, a simple, country-born garage mechanic, was designed to add humor to the town of Mayberry. Lindsey, who had experience in television and maintained a steady relationship with the production team, was confident that the role was almost a lock. Not only was he skilled, but he had a distinct Southern accent that fit the tone of the show. While the script was being finalized, Andy Griffith, the star and biggest voice in the production, was invited by a friend to a small club in Los Angeles to see a comedy show. There, Jim Nabors stepped onto the stage. He had no reputation, no television experience, but after just a few minutes of performing, he made the audience laugh with his natural innocence and unmistakable voice. The next day, Griffith proposed to the production team that Nabors play the new character. Initially, the idea was not universally welcomed. A newcomer with no formal training who had never appeared in a regular television role, it was a gamble. But Griffith was adamant. He said Nabors could not only do comedy but also bring the spirit of the character he was envisioning. To test the waters, the production invited Nabors to audition. After just one rehearsal, everyone in the room agreed, Gomer. Pyle had found his man. George Lindsey was fired shortly thereafter. There was no explanation, no formal meeting to announce it. For Lindsey, it was more than just losing a role. It was losing the chance to break out of supporting roles, losing his standing with producers, and losing the belief that the hard work of building a working relationship would pay off. In his later autobiography, Lindsey did not elaborate on the frustrations of the time, but those who worked with him at the time confirmed he was quiet, unassuming, and non-confrontational, but also unable to hide the lingering coldness. Things got awkward when Jim Nabors came on board as the chosen one. Not everyone knew that someone else had almost got the part and was still working behind the scenes. In October 1962, the first Gomer episode aired. The character was an immediate hit. The positive reaction from audiences, the press, and the crew made it clear that Griffith had been right to put his faith in Jim Nabors. While Nabors's career began to take off, George Lindsey was no longer the center of script discussions. Sometime later, to keep him on the show, the production team created a new character, Gomer. Pyle, who was written as Gomer's cousin. Lindsey agreed to take the role, knowing that if he refused, he could lose his place on the show. But it didn't feel like being cast as the lead. He went from being active to being passive, and it had a lasting effect. Since then, every time Jim Nabors has appeared on screen as Gomer, audiences have praised his innocence and charm. Behind the camera, George Lindsey has had to adjust his personal emotions to continue to survive in a changing work environment. Gomer. Pyle was officially Jim Nabors's, and George Lindsey, who was almost cast, became an extra in the role he had once believed was his. George Lindsey did not turn down the role of Gomer. Pyle after losing out on the role of Gomer. He accepted the production's offer as a way to keep himself in the show. Gomer was written as Gomer's cousin with a simpler personality, more comic relief, and decidedly less depth than the role Lindsey had been prepared to play. It was a supporting role born out of a lead role that had already passed him by. On his first day of filming as Gomer, Lindsey arrived on set on time, remained absolutely professional, and acted well as usual. But his co-stars and backstage crew noticed that he was quieter than usual. Although he didn't complain, he didn't show any real interest in the character. George didn't say anything, one crew member recalled, but everyone knew what he was feeling. One of the most telling moments of frustration occurred when George Lindsey watched the first Gomer. Pyle episode. When Jim Nabors walked into the frame with his signature voice and goofy look, the audience reacted with excitement. According to his close friend, Lindsey stood up, kicked over his chair, turned off the TV, and exclaimed, "That should have been me." In public, though, Lindsey maintained a mild demeanor. In later interviews, he always said that he was happy to play Gomer and that he had no problems with Jim Nabors. But the truth behind the scenes was not quite so clear. During the first few years after Gomer appeared, Lindsey and Nabors barely spoke. There were no friendly greetings, there was no interaction outside of work. The scenes that featured both characters were carefully choreographed to avoid having the two of them together for unnecessarily long periods of time. Many on the set insisted that the two never argued, but the distance between them was obvious. There was mutual respect, but no intimacy. That coldness did not come from Nabors, he was always polite and courteous. George Lindsey, though, carried a quiet resentment. For a long time, it did not erupt into open conflict, but it was never fully resolved during the show's peak. In his autobiography Gomer in a Nutshell, Lindsey spoke positively of Jim Nabors. He wrote that Nabors had a special talent, a wonderful voice, and did a great job as Gomer. But elsewhere, he also noted the disappointment of losing the role he thought he had secured. In a short passage, Lindsey said, "Seeing someone else living the life I thought I had is hard to swallow." Gomer eventually made an impression on viewers, but it could not become the launching pad that Gomer was. Gomer was often written as a supporting character in comedic situations with little psychological depth. Lindsey did a good job, sometimes very well, but he knew this was not the big opportunity it used to be. George Lindsey did not leave the show. He was still working professionally, still making millions laugh, still beloved as Gomer. But those who knew the backstage story knew the role was born out of a void he never really filled. Success came, but with a price. Jim Nabors quickly became the most recognizable face on the Andy Griffith Show after just a few appearances. Soon after, he was spun off to host a new series, Gomer Pyle USMC, which began in 1964. Although initially a spin-off, the show ran for 150 episodes and established Nabors as a television star. The character of Gomer was more than just a goofy Marine. He represented a sincere, innocent American image that made a strong emotional connection with audiences at the time. George Lindsey stayed on the Andy Griffith Show for a while before reprising his role as Gomer on the series' successor Mayberry RFD. He then starred in the hit comedy show Hee Haw for over 20 years. Gomer became synonymous with Lindsey, and most people could not picture him in any other role. The biggest thing Nabors and Lindsey had in common was that they were both pigeonholed by the characters that made them famous. Nabors tried his hand at music, performing as a baritone in his own shows and releasing several albums. But wherever he went, he was still recognized as Gomer. His other roles in films like The Best Little Whorehouse in Texas and Cannonball Run 2 were less memorable, in part because audiences could not separate him from the simple-minded soldier Gomer. A similar situation happened to Lindsey. Before joining the Andy Griffith Show, he had intended to develop a career in theater. After leaving the series, he repeatedly expressed his desire to return to performing in plays, but directors often refused, saying, "The audience won't believe you unless you're Gomer." In his memoir, Lindsey recounts that he once applied for a role in a local tragedy, but when he went on stage to try out, the audience burst out laughing, not because he was a comedian, but because they were so used to seeing Gomer that they could not accept anything else. He repeatedly said that accepting the role of Gomer, while keeping him employed, also closed many doors. In a 1990 interview with the Tennessean, Lindsey said, "Frankly, I knew I could do more. But after Gomer, I never got the chance again." Still, he did not publicly blame Jim Nabors or the film crew. Instead, he blamed the timing and choices of others. Nabors, for his part, was well aware of the limitations Gomer imposed. "I do not hate Gomer," he told reporters in the late 1980s, "but I do not want to carry Gomer with me for the rest of my life. And in the end, I cannot separate myself from that character." Nabors spent much of his later years in Hawaii, staying away from the entertainment industry and only participating in special events or limited performances. They never compared each other publicly, but audiences and critics did. In an article summarizing their careers, TV Guide magazine commented, "Nabors was the star, Lindsey was the keeper. Without Lindsey, Gomer would lack a fulcrum. But without Gomer, Gomer could not exist." That comment reflected the harsh but accurate reality. One is remembered as the lead, the other as a persistent supporting character. Amidst the achievements and accolades, what remains is the limitation that both must accept for the rest of their lives. They entered the profession with broader goals, but in the end, they were both fixed in the image imposed by the audience at that time. No one thought these two people from two different paths would continue in such a similar direction, loved but never escaping the character that brought them up. After leaving the spotlight, both George Lindsey and Jim Nabors opted for quieter lifestyles. Nabors settled in Hawaii, rarely making public appearances, focusing mainly on singing in small groups or at charity events. Lindsey continued to work in Nashville, doing some local television work, teaching, and devoting time to community service. As they were no longer on television, their relationship began to change. In the early years, they kept their distance, even during cast reunions of The Andy Griffith Show. But by the late 1990s, as both were past their peak careers, they began to reconnect. There was no formal meeting to make up, but they gradually accepted that they had spent the most important years of their lives together in the same setting, albeit not in the same mood. They were not as tense as they used to be. Betty Lynn, their close co-star, said in a 2018 interview that they did not talk much, but they called each other occasionally. The topics were usually about home, old sets, and friends they had lost. George Lindsey's son, George Jr., confirmed this in an interview with AL.com. "My dad once said that Jim was someone he envied but never hated. His silence was not spite. It was his way of dealing with disappointment." George Jr. added that in his later years, Lindsey often referred to his time on The Andy Griffith Show. Jim Nabors described this period as both the happiest and most difficult time of his career. He did not deny that there had been some estrangement in the relationship. In an interview with the Archive of American Television, he said he had no idea George Lindsey had ever been considered for the role of Gomer and only learned about it years later. Nabors was sympathetic when he found out. "I think I would have felt the same way," he said. "George is a good actor. Maybe things would have been different if he had taken the role." Although they never met in person after many years apart, they kept in touch by phone on special occasions. On a rare occasion, Jim Nabors' husband, Stan Cadwallader, revealed that Nabors had wanted to invite Lindsey to Hawaii to reenact an old scene for an Andy Griffith memorial event. The plan fell through because of both of their health problems, but the intention showed that Nabors had no reservations about Lindsey. In her later years, Ron Howard, who played Opie, also mentioned the two in a post. "They are both people I love. They both bring something special to the show. I believe they know each other's value, even if they do not say it." George Lindsey died in 2012 at the age of 83. Jim Nabors was unable to attend the memorial service but sent flowers and a note. It read, "George, you have always been an important part of Mayberry and me." Jim Nabors died 5 years later in 2017. Following his death, fans began to re-examine the once misunderstood relationship between him and Lindsey. Many subsequent articles clarified that their conflict was not as intense as the media had speculated and that the two had in fact maintained a quiet, more stable working relationship than many people thought. With both George Lindsey and Jim Nabors gone, the conversation about their relationship began to take on a softer, more forgiving tone. No longer was there any negative speculation about jealousy or hatred. The audience gradually came to see the reality that the two had a complicated bond, not quite friendship but never quite an insurmountable distance either. What is certain is that both left a lasting impression on the characters they played. Goober and Gomer, each in their own way, became icons of 1960s American television. In a time when television was simple, funny, and accessible, these two characters represented innocence, honesty, and laughter that did not need complexity to survive. At the Andy Griffith Show Museum in Mount Airy, North Carolina, the town that inspired the Mayberry setting, memorabilia from both Nabors and Lindsey are displayed side by side. Goober's mechanical suit hangs next to Gomer's marine uniform. A large photo of the two in a scene together hangs at the entrance to the exhibit. The arrangement reflects what many would later agree on. It is impossible to talk about one without mentioning the other. Audiences often share memories of Goober and Gomer on fan forums. While most are well aware that they were not close in real life, that does not diminish their affection for either. Some say they love Gomer for his easygoing personality but see Goober as the more consistent source of laughter. There is no distinction between who is better than who, just a recognition that both are essential to creating the distinctive Mayberry vibe. Years after both have passed away, people still talk about the moment Jim Nabors got the role of Gomer as a turning point not only for his personal career but also for television history. And with that comes the story of George Lindsey, who almost got that chance but had to go on to another role, less prominent but no less valuable. Lindsey has said that he does not regret taking the role of Goober but initially felt hurt. For him, the role has allowed him to remain in the industry for a long time, be widely loved, and maintain a more stable career than many of his contemporaries. But he also admits that being identified solely by one character has cost him many opportunities to express himself more fully. Jim Nabors was no exception. He had expressed a desire to play serious roles, to try his hand at Broadway or dramatic films, but the right offers never came. After retiring, Nabors focused on his personal life, marrying his longtime partner, gardening, and staying away from Hollywood. He lived a simple life, and when he spoke of his past, he was always respectful. Each of them has gone through a different journey with the character that they cannot be separated from. One played the main role and is more widely remembered. One played a supporting role but contributed significantly to the overall success of the series. And although the starting point carried many different expectations, the final destination made both have something in common. They were loved by the public, respected by colleagues, but had to live their whole lives in the shadow of a role. There is no definitive answer as to whether George Lindsey would have been more successful if he had played Gomer from the start or whether Jim Nabors would have been able to escape Gomer's shadow if he had not been so famous for the role. What remains is not a matter of supposition but of fact. Both are integral parts of a show that is considered part of America's television legacy. All comparisons aside, one thing is certain. Gomer and Goober brought genuine laughter to millions. And while there was an unnameable gap between them, television history will always place them side by side as two different sides of the same legacy. The story between George Lindsey and Jim Nabors is not just about a role but also shows how a small decision can affect a person's whole life. No one is perfect and no one can stay on top forever. But if we look from afar, we will see each person has left behind something beautiful and irreplaceable. If you found this story memorable, leave a comment below. Did you prefer Gomer or Goober, or maybe you just want to say thank you to the two people who made unforgettable television memories? Do not forget to like if you find the content valuable, share the video to spread the story to those who loved Mayberry, and subscribe to the channel to continue accompanying the little hidden corners of entertainment history. See you in the next video.